Welcome everyone to World Affairs International Careers and webinar series. My name is Philip Yun. I'm the CEO of World Affairs based here in San Francisco. I hope all of you are safe and staying healthy. And we are here in San Francisco. I can't even remember now, maybe the 13th or 14th week of sheltering in. As you know, the world is absolutely crazy, and all of us are trying to figure out and take meaning of the events of the last week or so as well. I'm pleased to host for you, and we'll talk a little bit about, sort of the events that have been happening. Pleased to host for you a conversation with Jessica Lee, who is a senior research fellow at the very new Quincy Institute, and she'll talk to you a little bit about that. These series of conversations that we're putting on here is really an outgrowth of our education program here at World Affairs, where we have engaged hundreds, if not almost 1,000 students, high school students. And in this very difficult time of COVID-19 pandemic, in a time of high unemployment and worry about the economy, as well as the death of George Floyd, I think people of all ages are starting to think about their priorities and are talking about how to make a meaningful impact in the world at this point right now in history. And I think in many ways, we will look back at history, will look back at the world in terms of pre-2020 and post-2020. All this to say that, there's a lot going on and a lot of uncertainty. We've heard that word, and in certain ways, I'm almost tired of that word. But what we decided to do was, it made sense for us to feature accomplished individuals early in their career, who made also prominent shifts in their career in terms of where they're going. And the thought is that they would be an example for younger people in particular about what they could do. So Jessica Lee, I'm happy to say, is one of these people. She's, as I said, now at the Quincy Institute. Thrilled to have her. Before we get into the actual conversation, I wanted to give people a sense of what the format is going to be. We've changed this a little bit as we've evolved in doing this remotely. First, we basically have two parts. The first part is what we call the lightning chat. That portion will not go for more than 20 minutes or so. And the idea is that we wanted to post this online and make it snackable. We understand that people have trouble watching stuff on YouTube or listening to podcast versions of this for longer than 20, 25 minutes. So that's what we're shooting for. I'm going to ask a series of questions about her career, her inspirations, and the advice received, and then she'll set that on the table. Then we'll basically say, okay, end of part one, and then we'll go to part two, which is about answering your questions. Now, we've got a number of people who are listening with us, Jessica, and if you have questions, please feel free to do so. Write them in the Q&A session. If you want to raise your hand and actually ask Jessica a question, you're willing to do so. And that'll go on for 15, 20 minutes, or maybe 5 minutes, depending on what people want to say or not say. But there's no pressure on this. But mostly this is all for you to figure out and ask questions directly to Jessica. Okay, so with that, Jessica, I'm happy to welcome you. We've known each other. We were just talking about this for 4 years. I've seen you in action, have been always really impressed. And so thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Philip. It's such an honor to be part of this initiative and to feel like I'm giving back in some small way to folks who might be interested in a career like mine.
Yeah, that's great. And I think they will be. And so let's start really quickly. Let's talk about your current job and what you like about it.
Sure. So I live in Northern Virginia, and I work in a think tank, as Philip mentioned, called the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. It's a bipartisan think tank that was launched in December of last year here in Washington, D.C. And the purpose of the organization is to promote policy solutions that will get United States away from endless war and militarism and more toward diplomacy and engagement through non-military means. And so I focus on North Korea, South Korea, and Japan principally, as well as support our broader East Asia strategy. Being part of a new think tank, Philip, I think my favorite part is, everyone is doing a lot of work and wearing multiple hats. And I feel like I get to really see how an organization is built what sort of ethos and culture the leadership, espouses, and how that affects the rest of the staff. Skill sets that I want to emulate in the future. So it's been great to see such motivated team members really just rolling up their sleeves and doing their utmost to make sure that our organization succeeds.
So for you in the work on the day-to-day thing is you're thinking about writing on policy issues really that focus on another approach to national security, right?
That's exactly right. So most of my time is devoted to writing, whether it's op-eds or reports. But in order to produce original thinking and products, you have to talk to people and experts as well. So I spend a lot of time on the phone, on Zoom, these days, previously, obviously, meeting folks in person, whether they're, folks in State Department or Congress or White House or just civic organizations and grassroots, groups that are educating the American public on these various foreign policy challenges.
Okay, so let's talk about your career path, which I think has been, in certain ways, very telling in terms of what your priorities are, and so give us a sense of what your career path was like, and did you always want to pursue a career in international relations?
I didn't. It was all quite, accidental. And I hope that liberates a lot of the listeners who probably think, she probably followed a very carefully thought out path. It certainly wasn't the case for me. I'm the middle child. My sister's a doctor. My younger brother's in medical school. My parents, I didn't really feel as much of a pressure in my family to be the A student and to do everything right. And that was really liberating. And I just, share that to say, I think it's really important for folks in high school and college to take risks, because so many times we're told to, get that job in Goldman Sachs or Google right out of college and to make six figures and, pay off your loans in 5. I mean, there's so many things that we're trying to achieve in a very short period of time. So that, and that makes you risk averse. And fortunately for me, like I said, I really didn't feel a lot of pressure to kind of be at the top in everything because my parents, they worked full time. I came from a very modest family. We grew up in Queens. They didn't really want me to be out there, like saving the world or anything. It was just like, get by, stay out of trouble. I went to high school in Brooklyn and, it was like, I just was a normal average student. And it was when I went to Wellesley College where like I felt like there was a world of possibilities, specifically because I saw so many women who, were doing amazing things. And that really, truly shook me to the core. Even at Wellesley studying political science, I was a political science major, I just didn't know if IR, international relations, or government was something that I was, that I could handle, frankly. And I still struggle to this day with imposter syndrome in some ways because, I was never taught to believe that, I can like shape American government's thinking on Japan or South Korea. Like that was never instilled in me. So in every setting, I have always kind of struggled with an internal sense of, do I belong here? Am I smart enough? Am I capable enough? Am I connected enough? But in any event, so going back to Wellesley College, so here I am after spending, all this time in, Brooklyn of all places, going to high school, very, multicultural and socioeconomically diverse, environment. Then I go to Wellesley College and I'm just like even more sort of at a loss because I really struggled again with a sense of like, I don't really actually belong here. Like this was all a big mistake. But during my 4 years at Wellesley, I got to intern in Washington, D.C. through the Wellesley in Washington program and just kind of did stuff that, again, very low risk. Nobody really, challenged me on it. And I just kind of, forced myself ultimately to be in positions and places where I knew I was going to be uncomfortable, but it really helped me to grow. That's what happened in graduate school as well. I pushed myself to go to Hong Kong and Japan over the summers and just kind of like, went out of my way to kind of see the world and just push my boundaries a little bit because I grew up, fairly sheltered. And so I think all of those things really help because by the time I finished my master's degree at Harvard and moved to Washington without a job, which was kind of a shocker. I think that's when my parents finally realized, like, wait, our middle daughter, our middle child, she's kind of gone off the rails. Like we need to bring her back in. And actually, I did feel pressured at Harvard, during the master's program in East Asian Studies to stick around and do a PhD. As you can imagine, that's sort of like the feeder program to a PhD program anyway. So, all of these things, I was definitely grappling with, but I decided, look, after I had finished my graduate degree, I had spent a fair bit of time studying East Asia, in particular, modern Korean history and literature. And there was just something about studying Korean literature and history during particularly during the colonial period, that really shaped my thinking about the power of powerlessness.
Yeah.
Feeling just seeing kind of the pent up frustration of a nation, made me first of all see my own privileges in a new light. I realized, like, oh my God, I have it pretty good. Like being able to study in these world-class, schools and have all of these things. I'm really lucky. And then I realized, what am I going to do with all of these things that I've, gained? What is that responsibility to give back? And I just realized, like, wow, what really at the end of the day I'm passionate about, that I would spend an all night just doing, is to fight for equality and social justice. And so I thought, well, you can't do that anywhere else than to go to the nation's capital. So I moved to Washington, like I said, 3 weeks after graduating from Harvard without a job, because it's very hard to do a job search in general, especially for a job in a city you don't yet live in.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I was able to find a job on Capitol Hill, where I spent 6 years. And, I would say just in general, in terms of key takeaways here, I think there is something that we need to acknowledge, particularly among Asian Americans, about the importance of taking risks. We're taught not to do that because it's, you just don't do that. You stick to what's safer. But you know what? I think that's an older kind of mentality. I think young people in their mid 30s and 40s who I interact with, I get the sense that they're not satisfied with the status quo, and something has to change, right? And so we're trying to kind of figure out our place in that.
So you were on Capitol Hill for 6 years, and then where did you go after that?
So exactly. So my career path is, I moved to Washington in 2008. I worked on Capitol Hill for 6 years. Then I went to a consulting firm called the Asia Group, which was founded by Kurt Campbell, and had a great time. I was there for about a year. I left because I was burnt out, and also I wanted to have a family, to be honest, and I wasn't getting any younger. And being in these high pressure environments really was not good for my health. And so I decided to pursue other opportunities that led me eventually to Hawaii, with my then 3-month-old daughter and my husband for a fellowship. So I guess that's another kind of lesson I took away from that experience, which is, I think a lot of people at that point probably thought, wow, like you're giving away, this kind of opportunity to step back and kind of, rebalance. And that's kind of a strange thing to do for a very career-driven city like DC. But, in your gut when you have to do something, and it's up to you whether you listen to it or not. So I think that's another element to kind of how I came to where I am today, is just knowing when to like step back, not press the pedal, continuously, because you'll burn out. It's just not sustainable.
So then you were at Hawaii, then you went.
And then I got a call from Kathy Moon at Wellesley College saying there's a job at Council of Korean Americans that she thought I would be perfect for. So I applied, and I joined CKA as its first director of policy, and I was there for 4 years. CKA is a national community-wide organization for Korean American leaders. And I really helped build the organization, which I'm really proud of. That's where I met you, Philip, and I think the organization's potential is limitless. In any event, just to finish my career path story, after 4 years, so now we're talking about last November, I left CKA for this new job at Quincy Institute.
Okay. So you mentioned this, so you're a mom, right?
Yes.
People, that I've talked to are always curious, are wondering about those kinds of issues for you. And you alluded to that in terms of the balance for you. What are the challenges related to that as a mom of a small child
Right.
in terms of what
Right.
you want to do, and
Well,
how are you
first,
coping with
there's
that?
the whole issue of becoming a mom, which
Yes.
is, yeah, probably for another conversation because that's that. And then once you are a mom, you're left with this sense of, how do I balance everything? This notion that women can be successful in the workplace and at home and look, flawless and just pleasant and be happy and cheery. I mean, it just doesn't. You can't mathematically get there. Like, there's not enough energy in you to like be nice to everyone and just have everything be perfect. So that obviously is not reality based. And I learned that. I mean, I think to your question, what you're I think getting at is how have I kind of dealt with that sense of always feeling inadequate, given the competing demands of my time. you know, I mean, these are basic solutions that I'm sure other people employ, like things like carving out time after 6 p.m. for your family only, not being workaholic, and alienating your own family members, and being present for your children. I mean, Philip, you and I have talked about that and how you captured these moments of their growth and development. So I try to do all of that. But I'm not going to lie, it's not, perfect. I still argue with my husband about doing things like this in the
No,
middle of the
really.
night. So he's very supportive of my, career, and he obviously appreciates what you do at World Affairs, and we're really excited to be part of the program. But even small things like this, which is during sort of dinner time at Eastern time,
Yeah.
these are the kinds of things you need to negotiate with your partner or spouse. And I think that's another element to people who can do both, is to have spouse who have a less intense job, who is much more kind of supportive and understanding of these kinds of commitments.
Yeah, and thank you for taking the time out, which is really during
It's
dinner time, so I
my
understand that.
pleasure. This
Uh,
is not a big deal.
so again, I'm constantly trying to get as much kind of cool bits of information. So really quickly for
Yeah.
you, what is the best career advice anyone has given you? And then quickly, tell us a failure and how you responded to it.
Yeah, those are great questions. So the best advice someone has given me would um, be a good networker, and for a long time. So I made every single classic mistake a over-eager person would make about networking. So this comes from a place of humility. It's not like I, did this from the beginning.
Yeah.
Like, now that I'm 36, I'm like, oh, okay. I see what the mentors were saying when they said, told me this. So basically being a good mentee, or like knowing how to mentor, kind of knowing how to manage that relationship, has been so difficult. And nobody gave me a book or a brochure. I just had to figure it out through mistakes. And I think what that means is, it boils down to is this. Number one, be gracious and understanding, because everyone's busy. And just because you think you're awesome doesn't mean they're going to respond to your email, cold email, asking for 30 minutes, which to me now, it just sounds so ludicrous, but I was that person. But at the same time, I was really strategic about networks, and I credit that to my first job on Capitol Hill, which I kind of glossed over, but it was because of the networking I did through the Wellesley connection and Harvard, and really just kind of being relentless about just talking to as many people as possible on the Hill, and being ready when an opportunity came for an entry-level job at the Foreign Affairs Committee, which is what allowed me to kind of get my foot in the door. So I think it's that, like, just having that hunger, but also at the same time being really mindful of the fact that, I think for many of us, mentorship is like somebody at like the CEO of Apple or whatever, like somebody, very high up, like many levels ahead of you, just kind of like reaching out of the blue and being like, I want to mentor, you, and you're my protege.
Right.
But like, that has never happened to me. And I don't think that's how it works in general. I think it's a fantasy that we have. And so I think we just need to disabuse ourselves of that, and putting ourselves in like unrealistic, expectations. It's just not the way it works in the real world.
Yeah.
So being more patient and gracious, but really being thoughtful and methodical about, well, who are the types of people, particularly at the mid-level, that I need to know and emulate? And that's really helped me.
Okay, and then quickly, where have you really failed, do you think?
Yeah, failure. Right, right. Okay. That is a very difficult question. Well, as I just said, I think, having unrealistic expectations about like people I wanted to be mentored by and things like that is maybe not a failure, but something that I kind of did for a while. I guess an episode where I had failed and just done a bad job that I kind of regret and learn from. Um, Well, I was, so this is my first job in Washington, and I, yelled at my supervisor.
You railed at your supervisor,
Yeah, that's
really?
pretty bad.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's pretty
that's pretty
good.
bad. Yeah, so I won't disappoint you. This is like an actual failure, not like a little failure that makes me look good. This was just like a spectacular failure. So what happened was about a month into my job, I was sent overseas with 4 other people on a staff delegation to do some meetings related to U.S. Embassies and programs abroad. And during the trip, I got picked on a little bit because I was so young. I was only 24 and I was in this, committee job, and like people just didn't know what to make of me, I think. And they were like well-meaning people. They just thought it was kind of hilarious. I think it's hilarious too, in fact. Anyway, so we're in the middle of Australia, and I'm traveling for 3 weeks with complete strangers, not knowing what to do and how to conduct myself, and feeling really isolated because they all were like similar age, similar backgrounds, and there was me, and so people just kept thinking I was like an interpreter in some of the Asian countries we went to as well. Anyway, it was a very emotionally kind of difficult trip for such a young person, inexperienced person like me. So at one point I lashed out and I said, like, you guys have been making fun of my age for like the entire time of this trip, and I just don't, I don't appreciate it. At that time, it was like me standing up for myself, but I think I kind of made things very awkward and overdid it. Yeah, because clearly it was meant to be a joke and friendly. But so I guess so that was very awkward, and I consider that to be a failure because you should conduct yourself professionally in professional settings no matter what. And but that was something that happened, and I guess one lesson I take away from that would be there are times where you lose it, or, I mean, we're all human, right? Like we can't, be perfect all the time. And I guess the saving grace, in that episode was I just had an opportunity to like be face to face with these people immediately and to properly apologize and smooth things over and
to move on. And not dwell on it too much.
Yeah, not dwell on it and leave a very bad impression.
Okay, so final question in the lightning chat round here, very quickly again. So, this is a very difficult time right now. There are, all our normal reference points are no longer here. There's this yearning to do something. What would you recommend to people now about how they can make a difference? And that's a hard question, but what should they be thinking about? And from your perspective, and maybe make maybe make a recommendation.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think about that a lot. And honestly, Philip, you probably have a more profound answer than I do about this. But, as somebody who is still trying to, figure out her place in the world, I think, something that has really been helpful is to read biographies of individuals who have overcome adversity and just done amazing things. That's really been a source of strength. So right now I'm reading Stacey Abrams' book, Lead from the Outside. Not her newest book, but Lead from the Outside, I think formerly titled Minority Leader. And she goes through like her life story, and it's just, it's really empowering to see a woman of color, reach that pinnacle of success, and to reflect and to yearn to give back and to give more voice to, the voiceless. So I think, taking time to read, biographies and memoirs of individuals that you admire is helpful. Sometimes I think too, I have a younger brother who's, 30, and he's like much more cool than I am. And, one of the things I noticed in talking to him is like, there's a lot of cynicism right now among young people. It's like, what's the point? Like, why do I have to try hard and do all this stuff? Our government isn't responding to our needs. Like, private sector is not doing any better. There's systemic problems. Like, I don't even want to be part of this. So I worry about young people, really, becoming hardened. Really hardened to change and just kind of dismissing, things like hope. And I think that's a mistake, because we need now more than ever people to, to help us build a better future.
Okay. All right. So thanks a lot, Jessica, for participating in the lightning chat. Greatly appreciated. Jessica Lee of the Quincy Institute. So now we're going to start with the second part. We got a bunch of questions. And we'll just go through these. People have some very practical questions for you, and some other ones as well. So first, here's one that I found. Did you have financial difficulties pursuing a career path in the field that you have chosen, and how long did it take you to pay off your student debts?
That's a great question.
That's a great question.
Yeah. So it took me about 6 years to pay off my student loans, which I admit is on the short end of the range or spectrum. And it was hard doing unpaid internships in Washington, D.C. I've heard from so many people who say, it's not possible for them. When I did internships, when I wasn't making any money, I got scholarships at my university to subsidize for at least housing. Yeah. I had part-time jobs, tutoring, and things like that, just to kind of pay off the little bills that I was, accumulating, and just really keeping a light footprint when I was here. I couldn't even afford roommates, just like living in the basement of an alum's house in Bethesda. That was 1 year, so I kind of, did that just to keep the expenses low. But yeah, I think this is a big problem. And this is something I've, spoken about in terms of the fact that we don't have enough socioeconomic diversity and racial diversity in Washington because it's so prohibitively expensive for people to live here, while gaining experience. So
another question that someone had was, how can someone with an information technology background become a researcher in international relations or a diplomat? So in your mind, in your work and the people that you've met, how can I guess as a technical background, is that useful, not useful? What do you think the elements are?
Yeah, I mean, every, organization, whether it's a congressional office or a bureaucracy, need informational technologists. So, I think there are some jobs on the operations side. And then there are also people with STEM degrees who get employed in intelligence agencies as well. So I think there are, opportunities. I think, not limiting yourself to very narrow fields, but casting a wide net and seeing what kind of people and staff members are in these organizations that have to do with information technology or computer science, I think is smart.
So is the Quincy Institute, are they focusing, or do they focus on cybersecurity issues? Is that what are they doing?
Not quite. No, we don't really deal with cyber.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So someone said, I also want to ask, other than government and think tanks, are there opportunities in the private sector? And what have you seen?
In DC, right?
Yeah. Well, anywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Well, I'm going to assume this person is asking about DC. That's what my career has been on. Yeah. So yes, there are corporations that have presence in Washington because they need to know what's happening at the federal regulatory level and at the legislative level in terms of new laws and policies. So, companies like Comcast, Google, AT&T. I mean, you know, if you're a major Fortune 500 company, you need to have someone in Washington who monitors these things for you. So in that sense, you can, you know, work in the private sector, but be, you know, at the nexus of private and public by, you know, serving in a government affairs capacity, which is a possibility. There are also just regular private sector jobs, particularly, you know, close to Dulles Airport, where you have a lot of tech companies like Amazon Cloud and others that regularly hire, you know, people with, you know, various skills, including in STEM and science.
Yeah. So, and someone else, a person named Kevin, what kind of advice do you have for someone looking to land work in political risk or global affairs research?
Political risk or global affairs research. There are a couple of organizations like the Eurasia Group as well as the Asia Group and others that do strategic advisory, political risk assessment. And then you have the big companies like Bain and McKinsey that do that, you know, globally. So I would look at those companies. You know, it really, I think, depends on, you know, what you're studying and what you're hoping to do, you know, in that field. But my sense is that they are typically looking for either regional experts or functional experts who, you know, can help their clients understand Washington better.
Okay. Some people saw, okay, here's something, you know, you're now in a position where, you know, you're a senior research fellow, you hire people, you look at people, you recommend people in the field. How does an official, how does a formal education such as bachelor's degree matter in this field? And what are the value of certificates in a particular field in your mind?
You know, I think for most think tanks that I've come across in Washington, bachelor's degree, I believe, is a minimum requirement. Now,
let me add something. Someone just also just popped along these lines. Is this political science or undergraduate degree enough to start work in international careers without, say, a master's degree, for example? I mean, you got a master's degree, but is it, and if so, what sort of steps would you recommend?
So someone with just a BA, right? Yeah. So typically what happens is people after graduating from college move to Washington, started a very entry-level job or even a, you know, unpaid internship, work for a couple of years, and then, you know, move on to a graduate degree, whether it's in public policy or law like Philip, or, you know, a number of other degrees. So yeah, so that's how I've generally seen it. Then there's a smaller group of people who go from like BA to either an MA or a PhD, and, you know, just kind of do all the education and then move to Washington, hoping to get, you know, something more mid-level in terms of their jobs. And, you know, there's no right or wrong way. Of course, people have all kinds of, different ways that they stumble into jobs. So I wouldn't really fixate on that kind of sequence that much. I think what's more important is, you know, what you studied and, you know, what you're passionate about, what you do in your spare time, and really tell a compelling story about who you are to potential employers. And then continually demonstrating competency. So for me, because the biggest thing about my job is writing, you know, I just kind of forced myself to keep writing, even though, you know, it was really hard. I even wrote a Medium, you know, blog post, you know, things like that, you think, well, who's going to read this? What's the point of this? This is a lot of work for nothing. But actually, you're showing a potential employer that you have kind of grit and patience to research and analyze and come up with an original thought that furthers a discussion or understanding on an issue. And that's really valuable in my field.
And so, you know, we have a number, you know, as I said, we have a high school program. We have a number of high school students who go through this. I think some of them are here and right now, and some of them will be listening at a different point. So what experiences, classes in high school and college most prepared you for your career now? In what countries have you lived, and why did you choose to live there?
Okay, that's like a lot of
three of them. Those are three long questions.
Okay.
So first one is what classes? What are the
what are the classes? Yeah. Okay.
Skills.
Well, yeah. So in high school, I took mostly like liberal arts related classes. I went to Brooklyn Technical High School where they're actually majors. So you could get like a computer science major. Yeah, so it's very unique. And so I majored in like a technology and liberal arts. That was the title, but basically taking a lot of, English, psychology, and some of these, history, AP history, and things like that. So yeah, being part, and then going to a liberal arts college, again, like, you have so much freedom to kind of explore. So I took everything from computer science and biology and sort of the prereqs all the way to Russian literature, and, Japanese literature. I mean, like I just kind of like really explored because I was a big literature fan. And so, I think, and I spoke recently with a former CIA analyst who also happens to be Korean American. And she shared with me that, she has a PhD in, I think, political science, but she said it was really nice, to be in an environment where you are encouraged to, sorry, that's my, someone's on a motorcycle. But, she was saying, it's really important to be in a liberal arts environment in the sense that you get to be a critical thinker and just kind of write and analyze. And those are the types of skills that I really depend on now, because for me, being in a think tank, you have to write well, you have to communicate well, and you have to ask the right questions. And that's the hardest part, because if you read the news, everyone's asking all the questions. So what are you going to do? Just like mimic what other people say? No, you have to come up with something more original and, something that contributes to the debate, right? And that requires, a different level of analysis that I think someone who enjoys reading and challenging and, having a really, the capacity to be critical. I think all of that is really important and something I've gained in liberal arts studies. I guess the other question was on countries I've lived in.
Have you lived in other countries? Have you lived in?
Yeah. Well, I was born in South Korea, so
yes.
I had no choice.
You had no choice there. Okay.
Yeah, it's a great country though. But I grew up mostly in New York, and I haven't lived anywhere else abroad. I've traveled extensively, but I haven't lived anywhere else. I mean, I guess one thing, just to try to do justice to this question, growing up in South Korea, was really fascinating because my parents were born right at the start of the Korean War. And, you see on one hand, South Korea with all its skyscrapers and you think, wow, this is like such an advanced country, but you go to those countryside where like my, grandma lived, for example, and, it's very different. And so, and everyone carries the legacy of war with them. They were all affected by the war. So just seeing how a country rebuilds and the kinds of inequalities that emerge and things like that were really eye-opening.
Okay. So, so a couple of other actually, I like these questions. So is there something you wished you studied more of? Okay. And you told us what you liked most about your job. What do you like least about your job?
Well, I hope nobody from my work is watching. They can tune off or leave now. No, on the first question, I would say something I wish I had studied more of. That's a great question. I would have to say economics. I took, one or two classes as an undergrad and like one class in graduate school, but that was it. I didn't really like seriously study it, but I wish I had done that because that would have really, I think, helped me to understand our society because it's, the political economy, is really critical. And the economics part, I think, some of us don't grasp as well. And so that's, something that I wish I had done more of.
Okay, so let me phrase the last question and then we'll go to their two real quick policy questions. And I think we can wrap up at, 5:15 or so.
Okay, great.
So the first, you've basically been in the public sphere or nonprofit sphere.
Right.
Right. So, generalize it. There are things that you really like about, that space. What are the things that you find the least enjoyable or the most difficult for you?
I think the most difficult part about being in the public sector is you have a lot of talented people who get burnt out and they leave and they don't come back. Um, so that's hard to watch, you know, for obvious reasons. You want talented people to stay and help build our community and our society, and help us make good policies. You know, I think the other thing that, you know, I've struggled with is, you know, Washington, D.C. is so, in many ways, homogenous, you know, and there's been progress, obviously, you know, I'm not, you know, dismissing that, but it could be so much more diverse, ideologically, racially, socioeconomically, you know, gender-wise. And you have to ask yourself, like, why, you know?
Yeah.
You know, so I think that's really hard, because I do feel like sometimes people just look at me like I'm this kind of foreigner when I've, you know, I'm a citizen, you know, I have every reason to be here. So that sense of like aloneness, or like just, yeah, feeling like you're, you know, you just stick out wherever you go is
Right.
not that great. Fortunately, I have a small group of friends who are also, you know, people of color who have really helped me, you know, deal with that. But I think, you know, on a more on a policy level, you know, private sector gets it. I mean, they understand the importance of diverse boards, and they're, you know, recruiting to hire, you know, to have a better pipeline for, you know, people of color and minorities to advance. But I think in the public sector, it's been much slower in terms of the progress.
Interesting.
So
Interesting.
yeah, I hope to see, yeah, more of that change.
So the thing about Washington as well is the generalization of it being very homogenous, and I think even more so in the national security space,
Mm-hmm.
for, you know, the areas that you're working on and the areas that I've worked on as well.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so really finally, let's shift to a couple of quick
Mm-hmm.
policy. Well, they're not quick questions, but let me. So you can choose two questions. One was, on the policy side, how do you think the economic, political, and social, you know, just the, you know, the things that are happening in Asia is going to shift post-COVID-19?
Mm-hmm.
That's one. And then how do you think the Black Lives Matter movement in the US is influencing Asian countries? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Those are really hard
They're
questions.
hard questions, right?
Right. But great questions. So on the post-COVID world, um, and kind of the Asian countries and how
Yeah.
they might, yeah. Yeah, you know, I do think that right now, for the reasons we all know, as you know, people living in the United States, there's a lot going on here, and I think there's a question of U.S. Kind of staying power and global leadership that a lot
Yeah.
of smart people are asking, and so the natural question becomes, well, what do Asian countries, particularly allies who depend on the United States for their security, feel? You know, what about China and all the things that are being said about, you know, its prominence and its potential clash with the United States? So yeah, I don't have a good answer. I mean, I do think that it's really interesting that South Korea has emerged as such a success story when it comes to dealing with the pandemic. I mean, obviously they are dealing with some issues now too, having opened up and, you know, people getting the disease again, the virus again. So it's not like a slam dunk and they're not immune from it, but, you know, but it's also a very small country compared to the United States.
Yeah.
So, you know, I do think on some level, you know, it would be great for strong, like-minded democratic countries like South Korea and Japan to become more, you know, assertive and, you know, independent, you know, in you know, protecting themselves. But this is you know, part of a broader question about what is the United States' you know, role and what are its, you know, end goals in the region. So that, you know, I think there are a lot of good questions that people are asking about the post-COVID world in general. And given that it's an election year now, you know, we have a possibility of a new administration come January, and they might just revamp and really change things up even more. And so we're in a really interesting and maybe even a volatile period. So it's really hard to predict, but
Yeah.
I do think Asian countries are watching very closely what's going on right now.
So we just got time for one last question, and I wanted to revert back to sort of stepping back and sort of final word. I mean, we have, a number of people are, watching now, but, many more will probably see this, see this portion of the video. So what are the takeaways for your career in terms of where you are that you want sort of younger people to be thinking about? Just maybe, the one or two big points. I mean, you talked about networking, you talked about taking chances. I mean, is there anything else? And then we'll just end. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, some of the, I guess, yeah, my final words would be, we're all unique and different. So trying to mold yourself to be someone else is really exhausting. I know because I tried. So, don't try to be like somebody else, just, like Michelle Obama. Oh, I want to be just like her, like I think we all have these ideas of what a strong, successful professional looks like. And we just do everything we can to try to be that person. But, your flaws and uniqueness is what attracts people to you more. So just, own it. People like other people they can relate to, not like a robot. So I think that's one thing, because I see a lot of people who come up to me, asking these types of questions, like feeling very anxious about, their story not being, perfect or, impressive. And it's like, I'm more interested in like the characteristics that define who you are and your values, because if we really click at that level, like I'm going to want to like keep, in touch with you, and I'm going to want to help you. I mean, you're going to be on my mind. So just, embracing your uniqueness is probably the best advice I can give. I guess one other thing just to end on is, we, I do worry, like I said, about people losing hope and kind of giving up. But we need people like you who are asking these hard questions to come and work in government and to help shape policy. So I hope some of you feel inspired to explore these opportunities, and I'd love to stay connected through Philip and his team, if you have additional questions. But I think now more than ever, we need really smart people to really help our country rebuild. So.
Okay, Jessica, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I know, it's dinner time for you again in the,
No
in DC. So thank your husband for allowing you to be with us, and everyone else, thank you for joining us.